and how things have gone so wrong in so many areas in the Western world all at the same time. And I'm going to talk about that from a slightly academic point of view later on. But for now, I want to, it's not really academic because it applies to everything, as I think you'll see. But I want to stick to a paper at the moment, just to keep us firmly rooted. And this is the paper here. Amid growing evidence of conflicts of interest and obdurate groupthink, immovable groupthink, or difficult to move groupthink, in medical journals, researchers must entertain contrarian ideas. And this is by Raphael Latasta and Peter Parry. Peter Parry, the well-known psychiatrist, of course, who I've talked to personally a few times. Fascinating guy. Now, let me just tell you what this is about, and then you can decide if you want to listen. So mainstream medicine, like other academic fields, is shaped by prevailing paradigms and the dominant narratives they create. Particular ways of thinking create narratives, and everyone basically has to obey them. We're kind of in a dictatorial situation here, politically, potentially, academically, certainly, and other things we'll see. Over the past half century, these paradigms have increasingly reflected the growing commercial influence of the pharmaceutical industry. So you'll get the example that this article, a very well worded article I must say, is talking about. Dominant narratives are closely tied to groupthink, to which medical journals are often subject. In addition, more prestigious, in inverted commas, medical journals tend to have further financial conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry. Conflicts of interest, never good, of course. We want transparency and the appearance of transparency. These dynamics limit scientific progress by suppressing awareness of the iatrogenic aspects of industry products. In other words, scientific progress is not made because side effects and adverse events are not always fully discussed, shall we say. And of course, these can include deaths, obviously. It does include deaths. And the benefits of alternative, non-patentable, unpatentable medical products and therapeutic interventions is basically ignored. So, in other words, we've got the harms done by the pharmaceutical industry. Won't talk about that one too much. Just keep quiet on that one. But all these other things that can't be patented, well, they can be actively suppressed. The list is long. We've looked at many on this channel. Vitamin D, for example, and many other things we've looked at. Journals need to adopt a more open policy to manuscripts that encompass contrarian perspectives. This is how science progresses, to dominant narratives while still adhering to time-tested scientific values and methods. In other words, if something's patently gobbledygook, if it's scientifically impossible, then okay, pass on. But if it's at least remotely feasible, then these things should be discussed. This is how science progresses. Anyway, let's look at some of the specifics from this article, and you'll see it really is quite interesting. So some of this comes from Thomas Klung. Now, he wrote this book here. I think this was published in 1962 from memory. The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Yeah, 50th anniversary. I think it was 62 it first came out. Basically saying that, you know, the status quo will go on and it will go on and go on till it's intolerable, can't be tolerated. Then all of a sudden there'll be a revolution. Everyone will realise. Who knows, maybe mRNA vaccines could be an example of this, amongst many other things that have been pretty well disastrous from the pharmaceutical industry as well. Scientific endeavour is subject to paradigms that restrict the ideas that are considered valid. So there's particular ways of thinking, and anything that falls out of this particular way of thinking, let's say the way I think, or the way an important person thinks, well, we can't consider anything else. It's ridiculous. It's outside of my paradigm. Not valid. The arrogance of that is incredible. Let's hope we never fall prey to such arrogance. Scientific and peer-reviewed literature influenced by groupthink processes what this is saying is scientific and peer-reviewed literature is influenced by groupthink processes as much as by dispassionate rationality. So we should be dispassionate, we should be rational, but what these authors are saying is that groupthink is just as big an influence on scientific progress. That's what they're saying. And they talk about science, which of course is good, whereas the science, that is, listen mate, I'm the science, you just do as I tell you because I'm a scientist. That's the science, that's outrageous arrogance, completely unacceptable. Whereas science, of course, is the attempts of human beings to understand the nature of external reality. So we don't want the science, we do want science. That's the way it works. Groupthink theories can be vociferously held and enforced with brutal censorship. So vociferously held. So Nicholas Copernicus, for example, around about 1500, I think he died about 1530, something like that, I can't quite remember. Anyway, he had this outrageous idea that the sun was at the centre of the solar system and the earth went round about the sun. Preposterous. Ingan Philipp Semmelweis, another one that we've looked at on this channel, said that puerperal fever was caused by pure bad hygiene from doctors. This is ludicrous. Doctors are there to cure disease. How can doctors possibly be causing disease? This is ridiculous. And when he told people to wash their hands in chlorinated lime and boric acid solution, the doctors refused. They were doing post-mortems in the morning, carrying the streptococcus from the dead patients to the living patients. Semmelweis realised this, but was ostracised because he threatened vested interests. The doctors were doing very well out of their trade. Thank you very much. We don't want to be told that we're causing deaths. Just imagine that. Doctors causing deaths. It's unthinkable, isn't it? If only it were. So some examples there from history. Conflicts of interest, poo-pooed them. Don't want to know. Not too interested in the science. Conflicts with our interests. Considered misinformation merchant in his time, this is Semmelweis. He is now an icon of medical science, innovation and courage. That's not a bad thing to have on your tombstone, is it? An icon of medical science, innovation, and unfortunately, to have these things these days, you also need courage. During the past half century, the profitability of large pharmaceutical companies has enabled them to dispense enormous financial investments into. So, who are they paying? Research. Deciding what research is done. Deciding... Oh, I almost said deciding what the results of the research were. There, near slip of the tongue there. As importantly, of course, deciding what research is not done. Universities, so research, compromise. Universities, compromise. Medical education, compromise. I should really make these crosses, shouldn't I? This is bad. Medical journals, compromised. Political parties, compromised. Drug regulators, say no more. Medical colleagues and associations, yes. And supranational organisations such as the World Health Organization. Could these be influenced by pharmaceutical funding? They can create, that's the medical pharmaceutical industry, they can create the medical groupthink consensus. They can track the way of thinking ahead, incorporating their own ideas, excluding other ideas. Internal pharmaceutical industry documents released in litigation from criminal trials, where the industry has been fined 122 billion since the year 2000. 122 billion in fines. And of course, the only things you get fined for are the things you get caught for. Obviously, we're not saying there's other things as well, but you know, we can say the things you get fined for are the things you get caught for. Have revealed companies invest in shaping narrative to dominate a particular medical field in favour of their products, underestimating harms, overestimating benefits. Don't have to think too far for an example there. Safe and effective. Conflicts of interest now bedevil every level of pharmaceutical medical science, according to the article, the journal that we're considering, article journal, peer review that we're considering. Pharmaceutical companies tend to oversee the trials of their own products. What could possibly go wrong? Large pharmaceutical companies provide the majority of funding to the regulators, asked with considering the evidence of clinical trials and granting or denying licenses. So the pharmaceutical companies tend to oversee their own trials, and they put a few bob in the way of the regulators as well. Not that that influences their outcomes in any way, of course. We're not implying that in any way, shape or form. A few journal chief editors have stated that their publications are effectively part of Big Pharma's marketing departments. Now, let's just look at a few examples here, because I don't want to give you any of my opinions. I just want to relate what is externally true. So, evidence for this here. This journal here, Industry-Sponsored Clinical Trials of Broken System. And that's from JAMA, which isn't known for its outrageous contrarian views normally. BMJ, Medical Journals and Pharmaceutical Companies, Uneasy Bedfellows. I would have thought so. What's that one? Cookies. Medical journals are an extension of the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. Interesting article title. Medical journals are an extension of the marketing